we get more, do we find when I get a raise, when I get more, that I'm thinking of more ways I can spend that on me, new things that I can get? How much of my time when I get a raise or get a bonus or get extra money, sometimes, how much of my time how much of this can I give? How much do I get to bless others? Here's another definition, and I'm just throwing them out there. What if greed is acting like my stuff belongs to me? The Bible's very clear that everything you've given is a stewardship from God. Everything in your bank account, my bank account today, belongs to God. What if there's a line where I start acting as if it's my own? A kind of embezzling, a kind of stealing from the till that actually belongs to God, and I'm acting it like it's my own. I'm throwing out some possibilities, but I am sure of this, based on the pages of the Bible. God wants you to wrestle with the question of what greed is. Do not blow by. You've got to come up with a God-centered answer to that, at which point you'll be able to discern whether you're hitting the heart of God or missing the heart of God. Good Tuesday morning to you. Just a few days ago, I was driving back with Joy from visiting her kids in Connecticut. It's about a 15 hour drive. And there was one stretch, not too far, so it's between Knoxville and Chattanooga. So the Interstate 75 is just 2 lanes. It's often a very congested, pretty busy stretch through there. But now the magic of technology, well, I was starting to see signs like these digital signs, hey, congestion up ahead, slow down. And so I was seeing that's a few miles, mile marker, so on. So technology, I look on my phone map app, and you could see 75. You see this place where there's like, it's nice and green tracking until you hit this long stretch of like these deep reds, dark reds. It's like major slowdown for this pretty long stretch. So I'm that guy who's thinking like, I've got to find an alternative. Now, some of you have, your little voice that's telling you turn left here, and kind of takes you around, that kind of thing. I just sort of like to do it myself for a lot of reasons. So I'm looking on the map there, and I see this little road, this tiny little road. Like you get off this one exit here, but there's like this tiny little, almost residential maybe, but it seems to kind of go along the interstate. But I'm looking here, and it looks like if I do cut here and turn here, whatever, and to get back on the interstate, I'll still get a little of the congestion, but I'll miss most of it. So I pull off in the exit, and I get on this little road, and of course I'm expecting there'd probably be a lot of cars on this little road. I'm expecting the voice on the technology routing a number of people down this road, except that wasn't the case. Like I'm on this road, and it's like, it's funny because you could almost see the congested interstate. In fact, a couple of places you actually could, and you see these cars and trucks at a standstill, and I'm just going by on the little road, and I was shocked with like how few people were on it. I was really stunned. And on top of it, like we're driving through there and it's gorgeous. Like this farmland and these rolling hills, these gorgeous trees with changing leaves, whatever, and it's peaceful and it's funny. I realized, I mean, it was this very stark, this very graphic picture of this little word Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount. And it's kind of random. He doesn't say and explain a whole lot about it. So I'm not here to give the final word, but here's what Jesus said. Jesus said, and this is later in the Sermon on the Mount, he says, "Enter through the narrow gate. For wide is the gate, and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter that road. But small is the gate, narrow is the road that leads to life, and only a few find it." I mean, if there was anything, I mean, this is what happened. Like the interstate is congested, and it's just full of cars. I'm on this little road, winding along that big old road over there, full of all those cars, and it's just this beautiful little trip, and I'm not dealing with congestion, not super fast speed. It's like 35 miles an hour, whatever, and so I'm going to come around. So, okay, there's this graphic picture of that, but what is it that Jesus was saying? Now, by the way, Jesus doesn't interpret this, so I'm going to offer a few thoughts for your consideration, all the while hoping you're going to ask the Spirit of God to direct you. What might this mean? And here's just a couple of thoughts. The first thing that comes to mind here is that a caution about making this a statement for all time in this regard, that, you know, there are only a few people that are ever going to trust Jesus. It's always going to just be a small number. The reality is, in that moment, what Jesus was saying was precisely, exactly true. Even as Jesus is giving the Sermon on the Mount, there are only a handful of followers. Now, there's a very large crowd listening to him. But coming out of this sermon, it's not like that even that thousands decide to begin following Jesus. At the end of his 3-year ministry, and Bob records that while there are these ebbs and flows of sometimes large crowds, especially like if he was doing healing or like a food distribution, like there were some really large crowds for some of that, and people wanting to hear the kind of, the things that he said. But in terms of the followers, people that were sort of all in on, we're going to follow the way of Jesus, it was a very small group. So what he's saying here in this moment is absolutely in that moment true. But I don't think, again, that it means, okay, there will only ever be just a small group of people. In fact, 3 years after he's saying this, there's going to be Pentecost where thousands of people go all in on Jesus, like in this one sizable moment. There's the epics and times through history, even some in places around the world today, where there's kind of sweeping revival, and the other caution here is, I think sometimes we'll get this, and it will kind of justify our little group has got it all right. We're the few. We're the and everybody else and the larger church, and sometimes this lends itself to, well, our little group is the righteous group. Our little church, our little denomination. In the larger church is missing so many things, but our group's got it. I don't think this is the point that Jesus is making. You can talk to God about that further as you'd like. I think there's this other reminder here that's embedded in here. The majority is not always right. And you can see this in the pages of the Bible. You can see it in the pages of history. Your mother said it when she said, well, would you walk off a cliff if everybody else was doing it? Don't look for your cues from what everyone else is doing. And I've even found sometimes, this is maybe a small little example, but I'm reading a post that someone has, and I'm kind of figuring how to respond maybe to it. I feel like I respond, but sometimes I'll look and see how others are responding, and sometimes I'm looking for my cues. Rather than, God, how would I should respond here? I'm actually kind of looking, well, how are others responding? I'm kind of watching, I'm kind of reading, and we need to be very careful. And here's a warning that even in the church, even among Christians, the majority is not always right. We could point to any number of times, but like you could look in the Civil War era in the mid-1800s, like much of the Southern church supported slavery. I mean, that this was, well, again, this warning, the majority, it was easy to say, well, like everyone in my church, where everybody, it's a warning, even in your church, in your group, that the majority is not always right. We've got to keep seeking the Spirit in the moment. I think another final thought that you could make here is the way of Jesus is not an easy or attractive road. Even in the Sermon on the Mount, you think about Jesus talking about loving your enemies. Way of Jesus is welcoming Gentiles and Samaritans and immigrants, people from other nations and nationalities. Forgiving, giving generously, giving to the poor. The way of Jesus can feel very narrow, can feel very hard, but it's the way to life. And I finished with just this great Robert Frost poem, The Road Less Traveled. He talks about coming, two roads diverge into a yellow wood. One looks very well traveled, one looks barely traveled, and he says, I ended up taking the road barely traveled, and I took the road less traveled by, he said, and that has made all the difference. Don't buy the immediate thought that where most people are going is the best or right way. Choose to follow Jesus, and when you do, you're going to find sometimes he's taking you down a very narrow road that doesn't seem like a lot of people are going down. Don't let that fool you. Paul, back again for a few minutes thoughts, starting with a thought about baseball. There was an exciting game last night, the World Series finishing up this 2024 season. And you've got a couple of the best players in the game that are playing in that World Series. One of them is Shohei Ohtani, probably slaughtering his name, who's had a very fun year, just a remarkable kind of player, who came very close to the uh, National League batting title, which means the person that had the best batting average over the course of the season. He just missed out. He hit about 310. I think the best had a 315 average out of 1,000, which means that just over 2/3 of the time he got an out. So he got a hit. The best baseball players are getting a hit about 1/3 of the time they get up the plate, which means 2/3 of the time they get up to face a pitcher, they get out. They fail. The best basketball players hit about half their shots. That's considered a very, very good number, which means they're missing about half their shots. They're having 50% of their shots are a fail. They're missing half the time. I've been thinking about this as it relates to walking in the way of Jesus. And here's the fascinating parallel for me. The Bible never paints a picture of the disciples of Jesus, of the followers of Jesus, of the earliest apostles, the earliest men and women who followed Jesus. The Bible never paints a picture of them getting it right all the time. It never paints a picture of them batting 1,000. In fact, the Bible takes great pains, and I think this is intentional, to paint to paint a picture of them failing with some consistency. And even if you look right up to the very end of the followers of Jesus who have followed him now for several years, at the very end, like right before he dies, they're still sleeping instead of praying. They're still arguing over who's the greatest. They're still running when things get hard. They're still and yet this isn't because, and this is it's not because they don't love him. It's not because they're not trying. It's not because they haven't sold out to follow Jesus, because almost to a person they have. But they're still not getting it right all the time. The Apostle Paul says, well into his walk, long history of walking with Jesus, he still says, it just feels like the things I want to do, way too often I'm not doing them. The things I don't want to do, way too often I'm doing those things. And I just need the gracious help of God. And I need this reminder again. Because most of my life, a good part of my life, I realized I had a kind of all or nothing thinking in my mind. That what God was trying to get me to was a place where I followed him perfectly all the time. God, actually, the only kind of people that God is using is people who are getting it right every time. And I realized I was shooting for perfection. So I said, like, that's what God wants. God wants a growth. God wants to get us to a point where we stop failing. We stop missing the mark. And that thinking was missing the mark. Because God's never painted a picture. And in fact, the Bible was clear to say, on this side, we are not completely changed. It's part of the glory and joy of the day when we will be completely changed. We are partially changed. We are in the process of being changed. But in the process of being changed, there's going to be a long string of successes and failures. Times I get it right, times I get it wrong. And the problem has been for me, and it still is now, if I'm looking for perfection, like if that's the goal, I'm going to be despondent. And any number of times in my life, I've just had, because I couldn't hit this goal that I wasn't even supposed to hit, I'd be despondent. I'd give up. I'd sense God's deep disappointment in me. This is what because as if God was, I wanted Roger to be perfect, and I just don't think he's going to get there. No, it's actually the process that at some level, walking with Jesus always involves a certain amount of, I'm not getting it right. But the goal is continuing to improve, and the goal is to continue to walk with God. The best batters, the best basketball and baseball players are people who are improving their average, but no one gets to 1,000. I mean, like a perfect, they don't do, they're just, and in fact, here's the other thing. Failure is actually a part of the growth process. Failure is how we learn. Like the different times I failed, I realized in various parts of my life, I learned something else about my weakness. I learned something new that, just like a batter who's missing certain ones, they're learning something about, okay, I struggle with this pitch, I'm going to have to work on this. That failure also teaches us things. So naturally, growth is a process of some steps backward and some steps forward. Again, I envision, and I think we sometimes envision that our growth or the growth of other people is I move from failure to complete success. No, I move toward an improved success rate that always involves a certain amount of failure from which I'm learning. And here's the other thing about failure. Failure actually is part of the thing that moves me closer to God. The idea of perfection, my inability to hit that for parts of my life, moved me away from God. I'm just discouraged, I can't do that. I'm actually putting too much strength in my power in myself. Here's the failure keeps me humble. Failure in its best moments moves me toward God, both for forgiveness, but also how do we move forward? How do we learn from this? How do we grow? Like perfect people, right, are insufferable. Like if I was perfect, it'd be like, well, I don't need God anymore. That's going to move me actually, ironically, towards the subtle sins of arrogance and self-sufficiency that I don't even see as flaws, I don't even see as failure. Like actually, perfect success is the worst possible thing for us. So I want to remind you, lest you be discouraged, but I also want to remind you that this is also what should cause us to be merciful with other people. You ever encountered somebody and they relapse again? And they go back into this, and sometimes we can have this vision for, like, if this person was really trying. Now, it's a different thing. There's sometimes someone, they're not trying. They're not trying to be better. They're not trying to improve. They may be faking a thing to try and, okay, but that's a different story. The reality is, most of the time where people were encountering whatever, they're wrestling with anger or some addiction or whatever. Let's be gracious when they fail. In fact, there's a certain amount of that's to be expected. You can't actually get better without some amount of failure. So let's change the goal we're shooting for, and let's change the standard we place on other people.
Well, I tried to repress it, then I carried its crowd. I reached out to undress it, and love let me down. Love let me down. So I tried to erase it, but the ink bled right through. Almost drove myself crazy when these words led to you. And all these useless dreams of living alone, like a dogless bone. So come let me love you. Come let me love you, and then color me in. Well, I tried to control it and cover it up. I reached out to console it, it was never enough. Never enough. So I tried to forget it, it's all part of the show. Told myself I'd regret it, but what do I know about all these useless dreams of living like a dogless bone? So come let me love you. Come let me love you, and then color me in. Come let me love you. Come let me take this through the end of all these useless dreams of living. All these useless dreams. All these useless dreams of living, all these, oh no, so come let me love you, oh come let me love you, come let me love you, come let me
Capoeira is a form of martial arts from Brazil, and it's infused with dance.
Come now through all of it. shirt.